The assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy on June 5, 1968, shocked the nation. Over the course of 5 years, both President John Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. had also been killed under the most suspicious of circumstances by lone assassins. These three murders had robbed the country of its most prominent and promising leaders who represented change in America. This video will focus on the evidence contesting the conclusion that only the accused assassin, Sirhan, was firing at Robert Kennedy that night in June. I first read about the inconsistencies of the Robert Kennedy assassination from a book written by former FBI agent William Turner and John Christian. After reading the book, I immediately ordered a copy of Kennedy's autopsy from the Los Angeles coroner to verify its allegations. 40 years later, Lisa Peace's 500-page book was published in 2018 and is an excellent review of all the evidence. There are other books as well. And the reason for these books is the continued failure for the past 50 years of the major media to cover the contradicting evidence in this case. They might skim the surface, but never go deeper. This video is a brief overview and obviously will not be able to address all the issues. If you want more information, more detailed, I would strongly recommend Lisa Peace's most recent book. In 2006, there was a huge wasted opportunity with the movie Bobby. It was a soap opera about fictional characters when Robert Kennedy was assassinated and totally ignored the bigger story about the facts surrounding Bobby Kennedy's death. It was written and directed by Emilio Estevez, and it starred a lot of big names like Anthony Hopkins, Demi Moore, and Martin Sheen. This flop of a movie dampened movie studios' interest in making a movie about the real controversies, similar to Oliver Stone's 1991 movie JFK, which was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. Oliver Stone's movie exposed the public to facts that they were never informed about, and as a result of the public outcry, it led to the formation of the Records Review Board, which forced the early release of sealed documents. The Robert Kennedy assassination took place at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The California primary voting took place on June 4th, 1968, and during the day, the Kennedy campaign were awaiting their results. The last guest of the hotel was in 1989, and it was torn down in around 2005-2006. That evening, Robert Kennedy was declared winner, and 10 minutes after midnight, he spoke to campaign workers at the Ambassador Hotel in the large embassy room in Los Angeles. Now, the X in this photo diagram is where Robert Kennedy spoke to the crowd in the crowded embassy room. When he was finished, he was headed to talk to the press in the Colonial Room. And to get there, he went through the pantry where convicted assassin Sirhan was waiting. This is where the shooting took place. Now, how did Sirhan know that Kennedy would be walking through the pantry? How did he get into the pantry without press or campaign credentials because there were guards determining one's credentials? Immediately after the shooting, Sirhan was arrested on the spot after emptying his .22 caliber pistol, which held 8 bullets. And unlike Oswald, Sirhan had a criminal trial, which found him guilty, and he acted alone. So you might be thinking, what is the controversy about? Well, Sirhan's defense team was led by Grant Cooper. He had previously represented mobster Johnny Roselli in the Friars Club cheating scandal, Roselli had worked with the CIA on plots to kill Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Grant Cooper faced disbarment for possessing stolen grand jury transcripts. So his defense strategy was admitting that Sirhan acted alone, but he suffered diminished capacity. Diminished capacity is that Sirhan shouldn't be held responsible for his actions due to his inability to know right from wrong. As a result, Cooper ignored all evidence that suggested a conspiracy, despite concerns by other members of Sirhan's defense team. Therefore, much of the evidence I will be showing you, the jury never saw, as it wasn't introduced by the defense team. In addition, the evidence the prosecutor used to persuade the jury that Sirhan had fired the fatal shots into Kennedy was also never challenged under cross-examination. Why is that important? Now, according to Wigmore on evidence, cross-examination, beyond any doubt, is the greatest legal engine invented for discovery of the truth. In the movie My Cousin Vinny, a well-meaning jury would have convicted the accused had not the claims been examined by an adversary. Cross-examination is essential because it reveals all the evidence, not just what the advocate or prosecutor picked. It determines bias and lack of objectivity of witnesses or certain assertions. And it also introduces conflicting evidence to their conclusion, which reduces the opponent's persuasive value. Now, if testimony can withstand close scrutiny or cross-examination, then it would be much more reliable. The adversarial process is critical in determining the truth. One of the major benefits is that in most cases, there's a lot of evidence to consider. And unless both sides are presented, the evidence can be cherry-picked and the jury won't get the complete picture. Let me give you an example. At the trial, the introduction of People's Exhibit 55. So this is the prosecutor Fitz talking to Dwayne Wolfer, the LAPD criminologist. Fitz, what does this envelope Exhibit 55 contain? Wolfer, it contains 3 of the test shots that I took from People's 6, which is Sirhan's weapon, and this was from the water recovery tank, and that would be the 3 test shots I used for comparison purposes. And then, as if on cue, the defense attorney says 55 may be introduced into evidence if you desire, and the judge said it is, without even examining it or introducing cross-examination. Now, as a result of that, the jury never learned that written on that envelope, People's Exhibit 55, was the identification number of a .22 caliber pistol owned by the LAPD and not Sirhan. It was the wrong gun number, and it was written in red ink. So Sirhan never had an adversarial system of justice. None of the contentions and assumptions of the prosecutor and his trial were challenged. And as we go through the evidence, just imagine if Sirhan had been represented by an effective advocate in a trial. To date, this has never occurred. All requests for a retrial have been denied. Now, for the record, in my 20-plus years as a human resource officer for county government, I served as a prosecutor in disciplinary appeals before arbitrators in well over 100 cases. I also served as the Sheriff's Department's advocate in disciplinary hearings taken against deputy sheriffs. I have nothing but admiration for law enforcement. And as we look at this case, which will be critical of the LAPD, keep in mind we're talking about a few individuals and not the dedicated officers of the entire department. However, it only takes a few people in the upper echelon to control the outcome for an investigation. The same cannot be said about the many different journalists who failed to look deeper into this tragedy. Okay, so then what really happened shortly after midnight on June 5th, 1968? Well, first of all, looking at Robert Kennedy's security team at the Ambassador Hotel. There was no security at the hotel provided by the LAPD, and Secret Service protection was not provided to presidential candidates at that time. So Robert Kennedy's security team was headed up by William Barry, a former FBI and a close personal friend. And this is William Barry after the assassination. It also included Rosie Greer and Rafer Johnson. Rosie Greer was a large NFL football player that had been retired, and Rafer Johnson, who was a decathlon athlete, was augmented by hotel security staff, and then extra guards were hired through a private firm, Ace Security, in order to help supplement the existing staff. Now, the X is where is a stage. This is a diagram of the Ambassador Hotel where Robert Kennedy spoke into the crowded embassy room. And the pantry in this circle here is where the shooting took place. I want to invite you first at about 11:30-ish, 11:40-ish, about 30 minutes before the shooting, to the Southwest Fire Escape. A 21-year-old campaign worker, Susan Serrano, decided to rest here outside due to the crowded embassy room and also the heat. And this was, like I said, before Kennedy spoke to his campaign workers. Her statement to the LAPD was, approximately 11:40 p.m., two men and a girl went up the fire stairs. The men were maybe Hispanic, 5'7", and one had curly hair and the other had straight hair. The girl was mid-20s, 5'6", white dress with dark polka dots. Now, 30 minutes after the shots were fired in the pantry, Sandra would see the same polka dot dress woman and only one male coming back down the stairs. Was the curly hair man Sirhan, and was he the one left behind? Witnesses said Sirhan had waited in the pantry for 30 minutes before the shooting began. Now, earlier that same evening, there were other suspicious activities. One was Michael Wayne. He was mid-20s, short like Sirhan, and was not a fan of Robert Kennedy. He had earlier collected press badges for access, even though he was not a journalist. He was a bookstore clerk, so he misrepresented himself in order to have a badge to have access where the general public did not. With that pass, he went to Robert Kennedy's suite on the 5th floor of the hotel and had complimentary bar drinks. And prior to Robert Kennedy's speech, as Robert Kennedy was going through the kitchen and pantry, Michael Wayne greeted him. Here is the kitchen area where the conversation had taken place. Robert Kennedy had come down the elevator and then on his way to the pantry. And that's the stage. So here's Michael Wayne getting the last autograph that Robert Kennedy made. And here is a video of that interaction with Michael Wayne. Here's Michael Wayne there. Now, Wayne would wait for Robert Kennedy in the pantry near Sirhan and the woman in the polka dot dress. After the shooting, he ran into the colonial room and then into the embassy room that was crowded with people, pushing people out of the way. Someone yelled, "Stop that man," and he was tackled and handcuffed by a security guard. Some believe that his eyes appear to be dilated as though activated by a hypnotic cue. He also could have been scared. But other researchers contend that these obvious public distractions allowed others involved in the actual shooting to escape unnoticed. And those distracting the public obviously would not have had any evidence of firing a gun. Returning back to Kennedy's victory speech, the embassy room was crowded to capacity. There was also an overflow crowd of supporters that were waiting to hear him speak to them downstairs in the ambassador ballroom. So here is the stage. And after any campaign speech, Kennedy would always speak to the press. And the press was located here in the Colonial Room. Now, the assassins didn't know if Kennedy would go to the ambassador room and go down that stairway first, but it may not have made any difference because eventually Kennedy would have to come through the pantry to get to the press in the Colonial Room. Now, here's the podium here, and the circle is the press room. And Kennedy's staff decided to first speak to the press, and he went through the pantry where the shooting took place, right about at that X next to the serving table. Now, as Kennedy approached the entrance to the pantry, and that arrow on the left shows Kennedy's position, and there was a guard waiting for him, Thane Caesar, and the red circle is Sirhan, who had a .22 caliber pistol. He was seen by witnesses next to a woman in a polka dot dress, and put the square there, and also Michael Wayne was nearby. So Sirhan was waiting behind this ice-making machine, and he was standing on the tray so he could get a better view because he was about 5'5", 5'6" in feet. And the woman in the polka dot dress was next to him. And the security guard is at the very far end waiting for Kennedy to enter. Now, the security guard was Thane Caesar. He was an employee, a full-time employee of Lockheed's Burbank facility where the CIA's A-12 reconnaissance plane was made. And he had only been working for a security company for about 1 week. He got the 1 week before the assassination as a moonlighting job. He did not like Robert Kennedy's politics, particularly his integration, and he made public racist statements that are on record. Now, he was directly behind Robert Kennedy when Kennedy was shot, and as Robert Kennedy fell backward, Caesar, witnesses said, drew his weapon. Some witnesses observed him with his weapon out. Now, Caesar claimed that the weapon he had was his on-duty .38 caliber, but he also owned a .22 caliber similar to Sirhan. The police did not check the guards' weapons, or they never even checked if any of their weapons had been fired. And Thane Caesar's job was to keep unauthorized people out, but he did not keep out Sirhan and other people unless they had obtained passes through Michael Wayne or other assistants. Now here's a video of the pantry just showing the path that Kennedy took. You know, it's now all torn down. And as we go through the door, there's this serving tables ahead. Sirhan came around the corner, and right about here he was shaking the hands of Juan Romero, and that's a view into the kitchen. Now, there were approximately 77 people in the pantry at the time of the shooting, so I've kind of minimized it a little bit. The red circle with the polka dot woman square is where Sirhan was. And you can see Kennedy is in the K in the orange. We have the maitre d' Euchre right in front of him, Paul Schrade a little bit behind, and the guard behind Kennedy as well. Now, as Kennedy moves forward, Sirhan bypasses Lisa Urso and gets behind Euchre to start firing. And when he moves forward, the lady in the polka dot dress exits through the eastern door. So when Kennedy entered the pantry, he started shaking hands with hotel staff, and behind Kennedy was the ace security guard. So as he moved forward, obviously the ace security guard did too. Right in front of Kennedy was the maitre d' who had Kennedy by the arm and was leading him past the employees. At this point, Sirhan approached and faced Kennedy from the front, and as that took place, the polka dot lady left the scene. Now, this is a famous photo of Sirhan's gun being pinned down on the steam table. There is Carl Euchre there and George Plimpton, and the arrows pointing to Sirhan, who at this point is still firing his gun. In this reenactment, Euchre said after the second shot, he had Sirhan's wrist pinned to the steam table, and he grabbed it with his left hand and held it down while his right arm and his body pinned him against the serving table. Here's a famous picture. You see it pinned against the table. Here's another crowd shot. There's Rosie Greer came in to assist, and there's Sirhan with the arrow. In this larger photo, you can see the corner of the table down there by the red arrow, and we can see that Sirhan's pistol is pinned in front of the round serving tray, which are typically 27 inches in diameter. Based on the space between that tray and the edge of the table, it would appear that Sirhan's gun is pinned at least 4 to 5 feet away from the edge of the table. Now, many witnesses said Robert Kennedy had turned and was facing Sirhan when he fired the weapon, and that Robert Kennedy raised his hands, in essence, to protect his face. Juan Romero, who is famous for the photograph for holding Kennedy after he was shot, was a 17-year-old busboy, and here he is at age 68. And Romero was one of the top 5 witnesses the LAPD determined had the best view of the shooting. He said that Robert Kennedy was shaking my hand and had just turned away. So he was now facing towards Sirhan when this guy came out and started shooting. The LAPD and the official version claimed that Kennedy was facing towards Juan Romero when the shots were first fired. And in their reenactment footage from their video, Robert Kennedy there is on the left, Carl Euchre, the maitre d', is in the center, and Sirhan pinned in this area. It's important to understand that no witness and no official version or official ever claimed that Sirhan fired from behind. Now, according to the Los Angeles Police Department, based upon the closest and least obstructed view, the 5 best witnesses to the shooting were Frank Burns, and in a 1987 interview indicated that Sirhan was no closer than 3 feet. Martin Petruski, a waiter, in a signed statement to Prosecutor Vincent Belosi, indicated that Sirhan was 3 feet. Now, Jesus Perez, a busboy, his testimony at the trial placed Sirhan at 3 grid squares away, or a minimum of 6 feet. Let me explain what happened there. During Sirhan's trial, the prosecutor showed witnesses a grid diagram of the pantry where each grid represented a 2-foot square. This is my version just for illustration purposes. The LAPD said most all witnesses put Robert Kennedy at 13E. And so using the grid, it was easy for witnesses to point where people were and where Sirhan was, but it also obscured distances. Sirhan and Kennedy, for example, could have been in the same square, and the jury wouldn't know if they were 2 feet apart or 2 inches. Now, Perez testified that Sirhan fired from position 17D. There were 3 squares between Kennedy and Sirhan, meaning the closest Sirhan could be was 6 feet. But Sirhan's attorney never objected to the use of the grid and never pointed out to the jury what Perez's testimony meant. Then, of course, Juan Romero, the busboy, 3 feet. And Carl Euchre said at the minimum it was 1.5 feet because the gun was directly in front of my nose. Eyewitness Lisa Urso, in a 1977 reenactment with the LAPD, places Sirhan around 5 feet away, and she's directly behind Sirhan. So in order to make Sirhan the sole gunman, there are some incredible assumptions in order to make the evidence fit. And here's the undisputed evidence that had to fit. The facts are Sirhan's .22 caliber revolver held only 8 bullets, and all 8 were fired. Robert Kennedy was shot 4 times from the rear, the bullets traveling vertically upward. Two important points. These were from the rear, and the muzzle of the gun was less than 2 inches away. 5 other people were shot in a horizontal plane. 1 person had a bullet shot twice. So that totals 10 bullets from a gun that only held 8. There was also appearance of bullet holes in the door frame behind the location where people were shot. The door frames would equal about now 12 to 14 bullets. And at least 3 bullet holes went through ceiling tiles. So let's look at how they tried to explain this. Unlike the autopsy on President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's autopsy was performed in Los Angeles by competent and very experienced pathologists. The Los Angeles coroner, Dr. Noguchi, invited to participate in this autopsy experts from the military and civilians who all sign off on it. Now, I'm going to be going through the sequence of the various bullet wounds, and the sequence of the wounds, like bullet 1, bullet 2, was not determined by the autopsy. So what I'm going to be giving you is the official position, although others disagree. Bullet number 1 was alleged to enter behind, or a bullet definitely entered behind Robert Kennedy's right ear. It left powder burns indicating the muzzle was 1.5 inches away, and that bullet was recovered. The second bullet entered the right shoulder pad of Robert Kennedy's suit, never striking the body, and according to the LAPD, traveled upward, striking victim Paul Charade in the center of the forehead. That bullet was recovered. This is Robert Kennedy's jacket in the California archives, and here's the entrance wound of that bullet, number 2, going through the shoulder. They determined that the bullet traveled back to front at an 80-degree angle. And here is Thomas Noguchi along with Wolfer from the LAPD. But the problem was Charade was behind Robert Kennedy. And even using the LAPD reenactment scenario, the upward and from back to front trajectory would have had to have done a U-turn to strike Paul Charade. And this is a separate photo of him. Now, the orange dots to the left there represent the approximate locations of other people besides Kennedy who were shot. The red arrow is the approximate location of Paul Charade. The red circle with the S in it is Sirhan's approximate location. To the right of Sirhan would be Lisa Urso, who was standing behind Sirhan, and Sirhan had moved in front of him. Lisa said, "I saw Paul Charade fall first, then Robert Kennedy." If this is true, that means Sirhan's first shot struck Paul Charade in the forehead right before Kennedy was shot by someone else. Paul has stated he believes he was shot by Sirhan, but Robert Kennedy was shot by someone else. And here is Paul Charade 5 days later in the hospital after being shot. Carl Uecker, the Ambassador Hotel maitre d', was leading Robert Kennedy through the crowd and stated he had grabbed Sirhan around the neck after the first shot and hurled him to the right, away from Kennedy. Eddie Manason, an ambassador employee, confirmed Uecker had grabbed Sirhan after the first two shots and also saw Paul Charade fall before Robert Kennedy. According to the official version, the third bullet entered the right rear shoulder upward to the sixth cervical of the neck and was removed. And the fourth bullet entered the right rear shoulder upward and forward out of the chest, passing through the ceiling, and according to the police, that bullet was lost. Now, these 4 shots into Robert Kennedy has the fingerprints of a professional assassin. First, the gun is at close range and behind Robert, where it could be more difficult to be seen, especially within a crowded room. And to ensure the shots were fatal, especially from a low-caliber pistol, the apparent target were Kennedy's brain and his heart. Whether it was in reaction to seeing a gun or being shot, witnesses said Kennedy threw his arms up in the air. Criminologist William Harper believed Kennedy raised his arms when he saw the gun, which altered the direction of the 2 shots into the armpit area. And here is, according to the LAPD, the 4th bullet, which entered the back, traveled upward, and was lost in the ceiling. Robert Kennedy's jacket, you can see the bullet holes there where the arrows are pointing, had powder burns. And the various tests using the weapon was that the muzzle distance was no less than 3 inches from Robert Kennedy's coat. So we're talking about a very up-close range. And another question is, if Sirhan fired all 8 shots, there should be no bullet holes in the ceiling tiles above and behind him, because he was shooting in one direction. So why were there so many ceiling tiles removed behind the location where the shooting took place? And in this famous photograph, you see that Robert Kennedy must have lunged at or reached for or bumped into Thane Caesar's tie, because it's laying there next to him. And here we see Thane Caesar's tie missing, and this was taken after the assassination. So we have, according to the official version, the first 4 bullets striking Robert Kennedy, and one went through and struck Paul Charade in the forehead. According to the version, bullet number 5 struck Ira Goldstein in the left rear buttock, and that bullet was recovered. Bullet number 6 passed through Goldstein's pants, so he's been struck twice, but this one didn't hit flesh. It hit the floor and struck Erwin Stroll's left leg, and that bullet was recovered. Bullet number 7 struck victim Weasel in the abdomen, and that was recovered. And finally, bullet number 8 went up, struck the ceiling, and then bounced off and struck Elizabeth Evans in the head, and that bullet was recovered. Now, all 5 of the victims that were shot had authorization to be in the pantry, as they were either with the press or campaign workers. And here's another version of the shooting. The first shot was Kennedy in the back of the head. Number 2 went through his shirt or jacket and struck Paul in the forehead. Notice this angle is entirely different from the angle that went through his jacket in previous photos. Shots number 3 went to his vertebrae. Shot number 4 went through his chest up to the ceiling. Shot number 5 hit Goldstein in the buttock. Shot number 6 went through Goldstein's pant legs, struck the floor, and hit Stroll in the shin. Shot number 7 hit Weasel in the abdomen. And shot number 8 went through the ceiling tiles, ricocheted down, and hit Elizabeth Evans in the forehead. However, the hospital report for Elizabeth Evans is the bullet hit the front of the hairline, traveling in an upward position. So it would be rather difficult for a downward bullet to have caused that wound. In addition to the victims, there appeared to be bullet holes in the pantry door jambs. Keep in mind, if there's just one more bullet than 8, we have multiple guns. Here's the approximate location of 2 of them, and here is Thomas Noguchi pointing them out. And then the other 2 were in this approximate location. And here is an FBI photo with circles and initials next to them. Now, the police claim that no bullets were found in the holes. However, FBI Special Agent William Bailey's signed statement to the district attorney that both other FBI agents and myself had seen at least 2 small caliber bullet holes in the center posts of the 2 doors in the pantry. These were clearly bullet holes. The wood around them was freshly broken away, and I could see the base of the bullet in each one. And according to the FBI report, just 4 days after the assassination, the FBI photographer said there were 4 reported bullet holes in the area of the swinging doors. And here we see that after the assassination, the panels and the ceiling tiles have been removed. They were not used in Sirhan's trial in 1969. And after the trial, the ceiling tiles and the doorposts were destroyed. Now, according to the criminal cases regarding retention of evidence, to protect a defendant's right under the 6th and 14th Amendment to the Constitution, law enforcement's required to preserve evidence that might be favorable to the defendant's case. I mean, after all, Sirhan could have appealed this case. However, on August 21, about 5 months before the trial took place, over 2,400 photographs were destroyed. And the ceiling tiles and door jamb were ordered destroyed 2 months after the trial, and were therefore no longer available for any appeal requests. A conspiracy to frame a patsy would not be a 2-person shooter operation. It would not be a small operation. You would need a support team, individuals to get passes, to have access, individuals to move shooters into position, signalers to inform when Kennedy or the target was moving, individuals to distract attention to allow the escape of the shooters. Interestingly, Juan Romero told FBI agent Bailey that 2 days before the assassination, 2 men claiming to be policemen asked how they could obtain white kitchen staff uniforms. Juan did not ask for identification, and the uniform storage area was locked. Question is, did they get these uniforms elsewhere? And within the first 3 hours, the LAPD dispatch referenced 6 different suspects. At 12:28 a.m., just 13 minutes after the assassination, apparently the suspect is a Mexican male waiter that works at the Ambassador. And Sirhan did not wear a uniform, so it wasn't him. At 12:29, LAPD Sergeant Sharaga described suspect as a 6'2", sandy-colored curly hair, very thin, light tan shirt. Did not match 5'6", dark-haired Sirhan. Also at 12:29, the LAPD officer Deloche broadcasts 3 suspects escaping, 2 males and 1 Caucasian woman. At 12:34, possible suspect being held in the building, not taken to the LAPD, but he was taken to hotel security, and we believe that this is the Michael Wayne that was tackled there at the hotel. And at 12:36, male, Latin, 25 to 26, bushy hair, blue jacket and Levi's, and this one is Sirhan. And then at 12:50 a.m., LAPD Lieutenant Sillings reported on television that a 6'4" suspect was in custody. And also, in an interview conducted after Sirhan's trial in 1969, a Second Lieutenant Russell Davis of the U.S. Marines told FBI he thought he saw police leading 3 short, dark, possibly Puerto Rican individuals away when he got off the elevator at the embassy room level. And there were witnesses described seeing a second gunman. A man with a gun stepped out from behind a wall, and then he heard a shot. And that was Ronald Panda in his interview with the LAPD. The guy with the gun could have left. No one seemed to pay attention. Darnell Johnson during his police interview. My God, he had a gun and we let him go by while Sirhan was being subdued, Joseph Klein, in his LAPD interview. And witnesses describe seeing a second gunman. We had 2 reports from 2 of the eyewitnesses that there were 2 assailants involved. Larry Shear, KTLA live broadcast footage on the day of the assassination. And what about the woman in the polka dot dress? And this photograph here is the newspaper simulation of what she looked like based upon eyewitness accounts. That she was 5'6", Caucasian, attractive, had a slightly hooked nose. Vincent DePiero, a USC student and hotel waiter who voluntarily testified to a grand jury that he saw from a distance of 5 feet the girl in the polka dot dress with Sirhan in the pantry moments before the shooting. He testified that they were together. He told the grand jury they were both smiling. Jack Merritt, security guards, said he had seen a girl in a polka dot dress immediately prior to the shooting. Richard Houston, who was in the pantry at the time of the shooting, said he had seen a girl in a black and white polka dot dress with ruffles around the neck. Houston said he heard the girl say, "We shot him," as she ran from the pantry. Jose Carville, hotel employee, who after the shooting saw the girl run into a dead-end hall trying to escape, only to run back out frantically. And then an all-points bulletin was issued by LAPD Sergeant Paul Sharaga, who received the information from an elderly couple. And at 12:25 a.m., just 15 minutes after the shooting, Sergeant Sharaga of the LAPD put out this. Prior to the shooting, suspect was observed with a female Caucasian described as 23 to 27 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, wearing a white wool dress with 3/4 sleeves and a small black polka dots. And then we have Sandra Serrano, interviewed live from the Ambassador Hotel at 1:30 a.m. on June 5, 1968 by Sandy Vanacore of the NBC News. And as we mentioned before, she had been outside to cool off on the rear metal fire escape. She said, then this girl came running down the stairs and said, we've shot him, we've shot him. Who did you shoot? And she said, we've shot Senator Kennedy. And after that, a boy came down with her. He was about 23 years old, and he was Mexican-American. She was not of Mexican-American descent. She was Caucasian. She had on a white dress with polka dots. She was light-skinned. She had a funny nose. And even Sirhan, under hypnosis, he remembered meeting the girl in a polka dot dress that night and becoming smitten by her. He said she led him to the pantry and gave cue to him to go into range mode, believing he was at a firing range and seeing circles with targets in front of his eyes. At Sirhan's trial, LAPD officers who gave Sirhan an eye test testified that his pupils were dilated and didn't respond to light. Dilated eyes could be in response to a hypnotic state. Officers also testified there was no smell of alcohol from Sirhan. Whatever his state, Sirhan from the beginning stated he has no memory of shooting Robert Kennedy. Now, in June 11th, 1968, 6 days after the assassination, a task force within the Los Angeles Police Department was formed called Special Unit Senator. The LAPD Chief of Detectives recommended Lieutenant Manny Pena, who was retired at the time, to be one of the two lieutenants in charge. Pena had retired from the LAPD a year before in 1967, and he worked for the Agency of International Development. During the Church Senate hearings in 1975, this agency served as a front for CIA activities. Pena returned back to the LAPD in April of 1968. Pena's close partner and Special Unit Senator was Hank Hernandez, involved in CIA's police training activities in Latin America. 11 days after the formation of Special Unit Senator, the polka dot girl hunt was called off. They said that Valerie Schulte, age 22, a campaign worker for Robert Kennedy, was the only woman in the pantry wearing a polka dot dress. Now, this was what was presented during Sirhan's trial, that she was the polka dot lady. Problem is, she did not wear a white dress with black or dark blue polka dots. Her dress was green with yellow polka dots as compared to the dress on the right, which witnesses described. Valerie didn't have a hooked nose, nor did she have a voluptuous figure, which the witnesses described the lady in the polka dot dress had. Valerie also, in the pantry on June 5th, had a cast on her leg and she walked with a crutch. She broke her leg in a previous skiing accident. Valerie's hair was blonde with white skin tone. All witnesses described the lady in the polka dot dress as being brunette and with olive skin tone. Now, I want you to listen to this brutal interrogation by Sergeant Hank Hernandez of Special Unit Senator of witness Sandra Serrano in an attempt to try and make her change her statement.
Sandy, I'm not going to ask you any more questions, not a single one. I do want to talk to you like a brother. Look, I presume, I don't know what religion you are. I'm Catholic. Are you Catholic?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Does that mean that you don't practice? Alright, okay, here's the thing. You're an intelligent young girl. You know that for some reason, this was made up. So here's what you have to think about right now, is that I think you owe it to Senator Kennedy, the late Senator Kennedy, to come forth, be a woman about this. If he, and you don't know, and I don't know whether he's a witness right now in this room watching what we're doing in here, don't shame his death by keeping this thing up. I have compassion for you. I want to know why. I want to know why you did what you did. This is a very serious thing.
I've seen those people.
No, Sandy. Remember what I told you about that? You can't say you saw something when you didn't see it.
And
Sandy,
she
look,
said that to me.
I can explain this to the investigators where you don't even have to talk to them and they won't talk to you. I can do this. But I know that as you get older, one of these days you're going to be a mother. You're going to be a mother, you're going to have kids, and you know that you can't live a life of shame knowing what you're doing right now is wrong.
I feel I'm doing that thing wrong.
Well, maybe you don't feel it, but when you get older, you will. But please, in the name of Kennedy,
I don't want to leave a cancer. I'm going to get sick.
if you know that this is wrong, I mean, Sandy, you know that this is wrong. You might want to be pushing it off with a smirk on your face, with a smile, but you know that deep inside what you have done.
I remember seeing a girl.
The case against Sirhan acting alone began falling apart within 1 year after his 1969 trial. In 1970, Special Unit Senator book was published, and it was published by the LAPD Chief of Detectives. And their approach was to raise evidence for a conspiracy and then in the book to rebut it. Now keep in mind the LA files were sealed for 20 years. So they were not open to the public to review and verify the information. The polka dot girl, according to the book and also occurred in the trial, was Valerie Schulte. And the book, of course, did not disclose evidence against that assumption. Evidence that could not be explained away was omitted. For example, the bullet holes in Pantry doorway. And the book disclosed, however, that the largest bullet fragment removed from Robert Kennedy's head measured 12 by 7 by 12 millimeters. Well, William Harper, after reading that, he's the famous Pasadena criminologist who's testified in over 300 cases, was puzzled over such a large size of a 12 millimeter fragment recovered during Kennedy's autopsy. In his expert opinion, that was just too large for a .22 caliber barrel. Sirhan's attorney gave permission for Harper to examine the photograph and the bullets used in evidence. And this is his notarized affidavit. And in 1970, he concluded that two .22 caliber guns were used in the assassination, and that Kennedy was killed by one of the shots fired by a second gunman behind Kennedy. The 5 surviving victims were wounded by Sirhan shooting in front of Kennedy. So based upon this, the most Sirhan could be charged with would be attempted murder because all 5 of the victims survived. And he also concluded it's extremely unlikely that any of the bullets fired by Sirhan's gun ever struck Robert Kennedy. And this was based upon examination of the evidence. And then in 1973, William McDonald, a famous New York criminologist, signs an affidavit that the Kennedy neck bullet, exhibit number 47, and the Weasel bullet that was removed from Mr. Weasel's abdomen, who was the bystander, exhibit 54, could not have been fired from the same gun, and that the Kennedy bullet could not have been fired from Sirhan's gun. Then in 1973, Lowell Bradford, a California State crime lab, concurred with these findings. And also in 1973, Ted Chirac releases his documentary film Second Gun about the inconsistencies in the case. This was huge. And in 1974, Vincent Bugliosi, the former district attorney of Los Angeles and prosecutor, files a suit against Sirhan on behalf of Paul Charade to force the case back into courtroom and to re-examine the evidence. In 1974, in that same year, Baxter Ward, LA County Supervisor, opens public hearings after Ted Chirac's documentary, The Second Gun, was released. And in 1975, as a result of this, the Los Angeles Superior Court orders a panel of 7 ballistic experts to re-examine the ballistic evidence. Their finding? None of the bullets fired in the pantry in 1968 could be matched to Sirhan's gun. Official explanation: Sirhan's gun had become coated with lead since it was fired in the pantry. That's the reason why they couldn't match it. They also found that 2 bullets allegedly found in Sirhan's car contained traces of wood at both the tip and the base. Were these bullets removed from the wood panel and placed there? We have no idea. And then in 2004, an audio tape of the shooting in the pantry was found. There was a tape recording made by Polish journalist Stanislaw Pruszynski, and it was discovered in the archives by CNN senior writer Brad Johnson. And the Polish journalist had left it on after Robert Kennedy's speech as he was walking through the pantry. Well, that tape was analyzed by Philip Van Prague, an audio engineer, and his conclusion was he identified 13 shots. Keep in mind, Sirhan's gun only held 8 bullets. He also indicated a pair of shots were so close together could not be from the same gun. He also concluded 2 guns firing were made from opposite directions. And in 2007, 4 additional experts concluded there were at least 10 shots. And some of these experts, for example, included Spence Whitehead, the audio science professor at Georgia Institute of Technology. Other audio experts listened to the same tape, and then they claimed there were no more than 8 shots fired. But it's also important to know that witnesses in the pantry claim they heard more than 8 shots. And I know that this is not an exact science. Duffy Lahive, for example, she told the LAPD, I thought I heard at least about 10. But I find this pretty interesting. Brooker Griffin told police that he had just entered the pantry and suddenly heard 2 quick shots. And that would correspond to basically what Uker said, that on the second shot he had it pinned, followed Sirhan's arm pinned, followed by a slight pause, and then what sounded like it could have been 10 or 12 additional shots. Now, looking into Sirhan's mental capability, this was a 2011 affidavit by Dr. Brown, a Harvard professor of psychology. He stated in his affidavit, I have written 4 textbooks on hypnosis and have hypnotized over 6,000 individuals over a 40-year career. Mr. Sirhan is one of the most hypnotizable individuals I have ever met, and the magnitude of his amnesia for actions under hypnosis is extreme. He also had interviewed Sirhan for 60 hours. In 1951, Project Artichoke was founded by the CIA, and in an internal memo, this purpose statement was asked: can we get control of an individual to the point he will do our bidding against his will and even against the fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation? They studied during this project the use of hypnosis and LSD to produce amnesia. In 1953, this Artichoke Project was renamed Project MK Ultra by the CIA. And in 1977, it was brought to the public's attention in the 1975 Church Senate hearings, and it was officially halted. Sirhan to this day has no memory of writing his diary, and for the past 50 years, he does not remember anything about the shooting. And then to conclude, I want to just touch base on the Scott Enyart versus the City of Los Angeles trial in 1989. Scott was 17 years old, and he took pictures during Robert Kennedy's speech and then followed him into the pantry. And on the left is a photo of him in the pantry. And right after the assassination and the shooting took place, the LAPD confiscated Scott's camera and, of course, all of the photos that were in there. Weeks later, they returned 20 prints, but the prints were those taken in the embassy room during Kennedy's speech, and none of the 18 to 20 that he said that he took in the pantry. He was told that his photos will be sealed for 20 years, and they were allegedly sent to the state archives. In 1989, after the 20-year seal period expired, he requested return of the photos, but told they could not be found. Scott then filed action against the Los Angeles Police Department and also the city of Los Angeles. In 1995, the representative said they discovered the photos and the court established the procedure for their return. So on January 26, 1996, a courier flew out of Sacramento Airport to LAX with the photos and the negatives in an envelope. The courier then rented a car at LAX, and within 2.5 miles from the airport, he had a flat tire and pulled into a gas station to call the rental car agency about his situation. When he returned, the photographs he claimed had been stolen. Now, he said that when he returned, his jacket was left in the right front seat, and the envelope of the photos of the rear seat were missing. In July of 1996, a 2-month trial began in the city of Los Angeles. And I had the opportunity to attend many of those days of hearing because they were held in Los Angeles. In December 11th, 1996, the trial court granted judgment in favor of Enyart in the amount of $450,000. However, 3 years later, after a series of appeals, the Second District Court reversed the verdict on the grounds of prejudicial juror misconduct. Okay, this is my final slide. It's important to know that all requests for a retrial have been denied. So there hasn't been an opportunity to hear all the evidence that we have talked about. Since Sirhan's trial in 1969, he's been represented by 2 other attorneys. One was Lawrence Teeter from 1994 through 2005 when he passed away. I had the privilege of attending a lecture by Mr. Teeter around 1995 in Los Angeles about the status of Sirhan's case. And I also toured the Ambassador Hotel and the shooting site, even though the hotel had been closed to the public. Since his death in 2005, Sirhan has been represented by William Pepper, who in a televised mock trial in 1993 represented James Earl Ray in the death of Martin Luther King Jr., and the jury acquitted Ray. In 1995, Pepper represented the King family in a civil suit against a Memphis restaurant owner, and the jury concluded that there was a conspiracy. The reasons for the request of the retrial were many, but we could boil it down to the fact that they all conclude that Sirhan's first attorney, Grant Cooper, had a conflict of interest, and his attorney never contested the prosecution's claim that Sirhan was the only shooter that evening. Other issues were none of the bullets that struck Robert Kennedy came from Sirhan's gun, and the fact that the autopsy revealed the gun was 1.5 inches from Robert Kennedy when the fatal shot was fired, and all witnesses said Sirhan was at least 3 feet away. It is only through public pressure will Sirhan ever get his day in court, and that is the purpose of so many books about this subject, and also the purpose of this video.